Okay, and welcome to another episode of The Accidental Entrepreneur. We have a special guest today to talk about cannabis. It's a unique time in New Jersey because I think as of yesterday, retail shops started opening. So it's the timing is very good. So I'll introduce Juliana in a minute, but I want to remind anybody listening, if you're listening on any of your favorite podcast platforms, please be sure to leave us a rating. And if you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe and hit the like button and all those great things so we can keep getting, good content to the people that need it. So Juliana, thanks so much for joining me. I guess you're in Vegas, right now?
Right now I'm in New York.
Oh, you're in New York. Okay, good. So
Yeah.
it's not really early there then. So it's 11:30 for both.
No. Yeah.
Okay, good. So like I was saying, today's an apropos thing because I remember we connected recently and I had room in my schedule and you jumped on. And then I saw in the news last night, like the first 2 or 3 dispensaries opened for public use in New Jersey. So I thank you for coming on. I don't remember how we connected. I think it was through LinkedIn or something.
Yes.
And let's talk about, I want to talk about first about kind of your background and because I know you have an MBA and your training and everything and what led you to cannabis. And then we can have a whole discussion about like what's going on in the industry and things like that and what Leafsheets does.
Okay. Sounds good.
Cool.
So I started in the cannabis industry in 2015 when Vegas first opened. When Vegas first opened medical. And I was getting my master's in business and I was a bit distracted because I'd started a nonprofit. So my parents said, you should take a leave of absence. You seem distracted. And that meant I had to get a job, which I did not like.
Was the nonprofit a cannabis nonprofit or was it something else? So you were just busy, you had a lot of things going on.
Yeah, it was for girls in foster care. It was called That Adopted Girl. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, nice.
And so I started working at a dispensary because one of my family friends, they were opening the first dispensary in Vegas.
Okay.
And as I was there, I was meeting all the executives of all the companies because they didn't have sales teams yet. They were delivering their own product in buckets.
Okay.
And
in buckets. Jeez.
In buckets. And then after watching kind of operating the dispensary and seeing what it was like to start up and seeing all the operational problems and loving startups and just business theory, I thought, okay, I might be able to do this in a consulting capacity.
Got it.
Let me see if I can. And I went to one of the executives of one of the main cultivation and production facilities. They're actually in will you let me open your dispensary because it was still closed, hadn't been approved or anything. And he said yes. So that was my first kind of client ever and did all of their standard operating procedures for the state level, so regulatory stuff in there and everything, and got them approved to open, and then trained their team, brought in their first inventory and got them launched. I think it took somewhere between 8 and 12 weeks. And that was in 2016.
And it wasn't as hard as it is now. Like the regulations weren't as crazy, or you have to do all those SOPs and everything that you do now?
Oh yeah. They were still as crazy. Yeah.
Okay. So when you first started in the business, you were working at a dispensary?
I was working at a dispensary. So I was still working front desk at a dispensary and opening this other dispensary at the same time.
Okay. And how did you learn? Because it was new, obviously this is 7-8 years ago. How did you learn all, like, what would you write in the SOPs and how would you write it? Yeah, all that. How did you figure that out? Because
Totally. So I kind of taught myself, I would look up SOPs for other types of companies, specifically pharmaceutical companies, and see how they were written, and then basically reverse engineer those also. And then look at the regulations, a lot of which give you the rules for what you have to do, and then combine that with my knowledge of how we did things.
But sometimes the statutes would just like list the things that have to be covered, but you wouldn't know how you should write it. But it makes sense. You find an equivalent industry, right? And you see what they did in those industries.
Yeah, exactly. And say, okay, we're going to do this. And then basically write out, here's how. here's
Yeah.
how we're going to do it. Exactly.
Now, was there in New Jersey, there's like page restrictions. Was there any kind of restrictions, or you could just write what you wanted to write?
In
No?
Nevada, no page restrictions. The applications they got were like thousands of
I'm
pages.
sure. Horrific. Yeah.
Horrific. And
Yeah.
the first round of applications they got were paper. So you
Right.
physically had it was like
Yeah. There was
trucks
no,
of
right. We were
papers.
barely online then. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you had to deliver
So-
this stuff in like triplicate, right? With a truck.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
okay.
luckily I didn't have to do the entire, so since it was just their SOPs to get approved by the state, it wasn't their actual application. They'd already gotten their license. It wasn't an entire app. It was just all their SOPs.
Which is, I think New Jersey does that too. Like you can file for a conditional license and get the license, then you got a certain amount of time to do the SOPs and all that stuff. So you can't operate with the license. You got to still get the SOPs in and get them all approved.
Yes. So
Okay.
it's similar.
Now in 2016, how many states had recreational use cannabis? It was
I
new,
think
right?
somewhere around 9.
Oh, was that
Something
many?
around 9. Yeah.
Okay. Colorado, I think, was the first, right? And maybe
Colorado, Washington, Oregon. No, California was actually after Nevada.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for recreational. And I don't even know where else. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But I think there are a few others, maybe not. I could be
Yeah.
remembering 2017.
Yeah, it was the early days. Exactly. So
Yeah.
that was your can strategy company, right? You started basically as a consultant.
I started as a consultant. It was not called Can Strategy at that point. When I
Okay.
first started, I had 2 business partners and it was called the J. Whitney Group. And then
Okay.
in 2019, I separated from that company and started Can Strategy.
Got it. So what did the partners do? I mean, if you're
They-
consulting, it's not like you're manufacturing and supervising things. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of them was a litigator. He would look over all of our contracts. We
Okay.
needed that.
So like your general
And-
counsel type of thing.
Exactly. And it
Okay.
was our, first go at consulting. So I didn't know how to write a contract or what terms to put in there,
Right.
So he would help us with that. And if any of our clients ever needed kind of legal help, he would help us find that representation. And then the other one was my primary business partner, and he did a lot of the technical stuff. He did a lot of our accounting and HR stuff, helped to onboard our team. We had a team of 4 or 5 at that point, and then would help out with consulting, especially the actual physical part. So we would do like reviews of cultivation facilities and check that every plant was in place and lined up with metric and do a whole facility inspection, that kind of thing. And he
Yeah.
would do a lot of those.
Got it. And then why do you guys separate?
We basically hated each other.
Oh, that's nice.
By the end. Yeah.
That makes for good partnership.
We wouldn't even be in the same room. So, yeah.
No, at least you got out, right?
Yes, finally.
Okay. All right. So then you start Can Strategies, and it was basically to do the same thing, just your own company, even though your name was on the door of the other company.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So how did you start finding, like, how'd you start growing? I mean, that's a business, right? So how did you start
Yeah.
growing that business and finding other clients and things like that?
It was pretty difficult at first.
Okay.
We, especially because we had just both left a dispensary and were in our 20s and going to people that started these high risk businesses, be like,
Right.
can we help you?
Yeah.
So to build that credibility, we kind of just did everything. So we would go to people and say, basically, what do you need help with? Everyone needed help with something and would figure out how to do it. So if that was training, then I would kind of use what I know from my MBA studies about how to train employees and like make it good for customers. Or we did recruiting, we did business plans, we did a feasibility study one time. So it was anything people needed at
Right.
first.
Were they coming
then-
to you before startup? Like they were like, we want to get into this, we don't know what to do, or were they?
A lot of them. A lot of
Okay.
them were before startup. And then We did trainings for dispensaries specifically, and then for cultivations, there were more cultivation facilities in Nevada than there are dispensaries.
Okay.
And a lot of them had no idea how to get open, how to do the state approvals and everything. So we would help them do that and set up their facility. So we would basically take the SOPs and apply it to the facility to make sure it was all set up the way their operating procedures said it would be.
And cultivation, we're talking like grow houses, things like that, right? You don't just grow marijuana in a field.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
gotta be yeah. Okay. So do you have people that you work with? Like, so you write the application, you get them approved, you do the procedures. Do you have people you work with? Like if a person says, I don't even know how to set up this grow house.
Yes.
There must be companies that do that, right? Set them up.
Yeah, specifically grow houses or cultivation facilities and processing facilities. I have consultants that I work with to help with that who have specifically worked in those businesses. And then with dispensaries, I do that with a team of people. So we'll physically set up locations and help them figure out how they want to launch and their strategy for growth and all of that.
You'll even help them find the location. Do you
Oh,
deal
yeah,
with like
all of
you
it.
deal with municipality approvals and stuff?
All of it. So yeah, to an extent. I
Okay.
don't do if there's like legal paperwork for that kind of thing, I don't do that.
No,
We'll
they should
usually
have their
find
own.
yeah, someone local, and then always find all of their vendors, so their point of sale, all their technologies, set all of that up, and then coordinate, especially during the license process, coordinate with the construction team, with the architects, with the accountant, all of that to set everything up properly and kind of set up who they'll work with in the long term to make everything work so they're not running around crazy trying to find out who to work with.
Got it. By the way, I hear some background noise. Are you in a Chinese kitchen or
Yes.
something?
Yes. Can you guys stop doing the dishes? Thank you.
That's funny.
We can hear all the things.
That's funny. This is all live. We will do it on the fly. Sometimes you hear background in my place too, because I'm in a co-working space, like people screaming and stuff.
Yeah,
Exactly.
got it.
That's what you can do. So I'm always curious because as I got involved in the business in New Jersey, you know, there are a lot of, you know, like not obstacles, but there's a lot of things that you really need to know and figure out in order to, you know, to get off the ground. So what have you seen like that? What are the biggest challenges? And obviously it must vary from state to state that these business owners face to get open. Like the obvious things don't seem to be the problems. It's more like the details and the, you know, all that type of stuff.
Right. A lot of it is their operating procedures because they have no idea where to even start with that. And then to actually set up the facility, they're not usually familiar with compliance and how strict a state will be, you know, that like, okay, you know, your access control, or if this door doesn't lock a certain way, or if this camera doesn't work, if, you know, all of these things, you have to be able to prove, you know, how to use the point of sale system and that you have all your record keep. So it's all these little things that they don't realize will be looked at. We've had before a log for cultivation that we didn't title one of the columns correctly and had to change it, and luckily could change it on the spot. But it's the tiny things like that that if the owners haven't faced it before, they will kind of panic, won't know how to fix it, and then the state will leave and they'll have to reschedule again for 2 or 3 weeks later.
And then they'll just say, I'm sorry, we're leaving.
Yeah. And if we're there, and they'll give them like a deficiency and, you know, report, here's what you have to fix. But if we're there, a lot of it we can fix just in the moment because it'll be little things. One time we just drove out to Home Depot because the state said, oh, we can see light under that door. So we drove to Home Depot to get one of those things, you know, the like end of door things.
Was this like where you couldn't have the windows, right? They had to be covered and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And then the door to the outside. And they'll sometimes they kind of just make things up. And it's important to know that too. So if you're an owner, you usually haven't read every regulation and memorized it. And when we're there, what we can do and have had to do a lot is regulators, because they're new too,
Yeah.
will make things up, I think, to feel important, or I don't
That's
know,
human
smart.
nature, right? Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll push back on it. And like, that's
Right. You don't
not
have to
the
accept it. Right.
rule. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's not the
exactly.
rule.
So are some states, have you found some states to be much more difficult to deal with? And because like, I know New Jersey's new, but my
Yeah.
experience with the state of New Jersey for other things, they're very difficult. They're very particular. And like you said, some of it's human nature, depending on who you're dealing with. Some are very accommodating, some aren't. But I think in general, New Jersey is like a difficult place to do business. So have you found that in some states versus others?
But it's just difficult to do business.
Everywhere?
Kind of. Yeah. It's a lot of times because every state is trying to, you know,
Flex
not
their
mess
muscle a
up.
little bit? Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
they don't want to mess up. They're like, we don't want to be the state that's a disaster,
Right.
They'll be so strict and so specific. And that can be exhausting
Yeah.
to
So
do.
one of the things I thought were interesting, and I'm not sure you could explain to me how it works, is people don't think about, like, when you have a store, right? You have an alarm system, you have locks, but you're talking about housing a federally illegal class 1 substance that everybody wants to steal for the most part. So how, like, does security have to be cameras and an alarm? Do you have to have an armed guard? Do you have to have dogs on site? I mean, what kind of, and does that vary from state to state?
It actually doesn't vary from state to state very
Okay.
much. A lot of
Okay.
them have similar requirements. They'll have, okay, you need this type of camera that can see this far, can see in the dark. You have to have this kind of lighting inside and outside. You have to
Okay.
have access control systems. We usually have to write out who has access to each area. So like regular, ground floor employees can't access this area at all. And so we'll write out who has access to everything. And then you'll always have a security guard. They're not always armed, but you always have some kind of security
On site during
personnel
office hours or overnight or?
during operation. And then some places will do overnight as well and have a guard that walks the
Yeah,
grounds,
depending on what's
basically.
going on.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard also that if you do, like, your security plan has to include like a schematic to show where the cameras are and how they're going to be connected, right? And you need plans of your building. A lot of people don't think about this. They're just going to say, "Oh, I'm going to put up cameras and we can remotely access them." And
Exactly. And even the detail of the drawings, the way that I learned how detailed drawings needed to be was
yeah,
the first out of state client that we had at the J. Whitney group. Actually, our first client outside of Nevada was like outside of that very first dispensary setup was out of state, and it was in Ohio.
okay,
And we did their whole cultivation plan and everything. And then after the awards were given, there were only 12 cultivation licenses given out. I downloaded all the applications of the winners and saw how detailed their floor plans were and their security plans. And so that gave me a whole new understanding of how intense they had to be.
So yeah. So do you need architectural plans for your space, or can you just use a drawing from the building owner that shows the space and you give it to your security guy? Or
you need plans. You need architectural plans with most states. So actually, it's funny. Some of them, you don't need a location, but you have to have a floor plan. I think because
how can you have one without the other?
Yeah, I think because they want to see that you know what you need on your floor plan, it seems. And so you know that you need this vault, you need a place for cash, X, Y, Z. And then you can indicate, there's security teams that I'll collaborate with that will do the security overlay. I actually have won a couple licenses doing that myself, though.
Doing the overlay with because you've seen so many of them, right?
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily. So if you've done this before and you have an overlay and you know the specs, you don't have to have a security company on board at that point.
You don't have to.
Right.
No.
What about the accounting side of it? Do you have to have an accounting team? You have to have somebody selected who knows 280E, right?
Yeah. No. So I've won licenses that we didn't have an accounting person. I think we may have had an accounting person review it, but they didn't really have much input because we've got like pre-built financial plans and we'll alter them for each state based on, how much wholesale is and how much the state tax is and
Right.
whatever other rules. And then so this is where it gets tricky. Clients are already paying a lot for legal representation. They're paying a lot for a consultant. And then for me to go, okay, also, we need to hire an accountant and a
Right.
security team and
Right
an
now.
architect. Yeah.
Right. Gets expensive.
It's so expensive. So some of them have the capital to do that and some don't. And it's not advisable. I would advise like we collaborate with those professionals for those pieces. But if some clients just don't have that extra capital to do that in that moment, then we'll do our darndest.
Right. Now, and that's where we're going to get into Leafsheets, like where the concept came from. But if you have, well, I just lost my train of thought. You were saying about, I was just going to ask you a question about, you were saying about, you had said you want a license here, you want a license there. Right now, your consulting is really limited to those states where you bid on licenses, right? You compete for licenses and there's a limited number of them. Because right now, I don't think New Jersey's really like that. At least they haven't said that yet. As long as you can find a municipality, they'll give you a space and you have a lease, you can apply for a license. That kind of weeds it out at the local level instead of at the state level. But right now, that's all you're doing, right? You're consulting on competitive licenses.
For the licensing. So we do a
Yeah.
lot of operational consulting with the licensing. It's mainly in states with a limited number of licenses. We'll do those. And then starting to do so New York, for instance, doesn't have a set number, but we're still doing the licensing because people seem to want help just writing out their SOPs and
Right.
just planning, figuring out who they're working with and all of that stuff and navigating everything. So it's not as high stakes because it's not limited
Right.
and we're not competing. But
Right. It's not as much pressure and you're not worried about losing. Just
exactly,
getting it right. You just have to get it right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just have to get it right. You have more chances. So, but we are still helping people. But we do not work in states for licensing like Oklahoma. That it's just you just put some paperwork together and you don't even
it's
need your
easy?
operating procedures.
No?
It's really easy. Yeah.
Okay. So anybody listening, you want to open up, move to Oklahoma.
It's way too easy. The hardest thing about it is that you have to have 75% residential ownership. So Oklahoma residents.
Got it. Well, I think that's New Jersey's like that too. I think at least 50% has to be in state, somebody who lives here, which makes sense. I mean, the states don't want to be giving that to people who don't live in the state, right?
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's get into Leafsheets because you're going to explain the whole metamorphosis and why you did that and what drove you to do it. But before we get into that, what's the pricing structure on the consulting side? If somebody says, "Oh my God, I don't want Leafsheets. I need like Juliana to do this." Yeah. So I don't know what the hell I'm doing. What's the pricing structure? Is it hourly, flat fee, kind of money are they looking at? The flat fee.
So,
okay.
Yeah, we do flat fee. Usually for competitive states, it's $100,000. And then we have a success fee for each license that's awarded also. And that success fee is paid over a year or 2 years, depending on how many they win. So it's not too much of a hit up front. And then in non-competitive states, it kind of depends on the state. So like how much is required, that state needs you to have together, and we'll price out projects based on that, and also a flat fee. Because I always try to think, okay, if I were this person, how would I feel? And I would prefer to be able to know how much I'll be spending, like know what your startup budget is.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I've seen everywhere from $75,000 to $250,000. Is ridiculous.
Yeah.
People are charging. But I guess if you have the money, if you have the capital, right, and you're really hands off, or you're really like, listen, I want to focus on growing the business and running the business. I don't know regulatory and compliance, and I would tell people who are listening, don't become a regulatory compliance expert. You won't be able to.
Yeah, and you won't like it.
You do it right. Okay, so but because of the kind of the high barrier to entry, not just your fees, right? But the licensing is usually $20,000 or $30,000, right? You got architectural, you got all the stuff. You came up with the concept of Leafsheets. So let's talk about, what was that? Some noise going on.
It was a sink. It was a sink.
Let's talk about like what Leafsheets is, where it came from, why you're doing it. Because it's really focused on the small business owner. So that's what's really cool about it.
It is. So it basically was birthed out of seeing a lot of smaller business, like entrepreneurs that wanted to get into the industry. And then let's say they have $50,000 or $100,000 for the licensing piece of it. And then have investors that are saying, this happens all the time. If you get a license, here's how much money we'll give you.
A lot of investors won't do pre-license, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I always thought, well, these people, what I appreciate about them is they're usually dreamers, like they're big thinkers, they're excited. I think they would really put in the work, but they can't afford just the licensing
Right.
fees.
And by the way, $50,000 to $100,000 is sometimes all you have to start the entire business.
Right.
In other industries, right? But it's a heavily regulated. Yeah. Okay.
And I thought, okay, if I figured this out on my own, other people, if I can figure out how to teach them how to do it and give them 75 to 80% of the way there. So, because just like you said, when you first read an application and it says security plan, people write, we'll have this, we'll have that, and not understand.
Yeah.
So if we can give them the bulk of it, and then also resources so they can know how to navigate things to customize their sheets. That's what we call them, sheets.
Okay.
Then they can have something substantial. And let's say they were in New Jersey where it's not totally limited except by kind of the local restrictions.
Yeah.
Then you may really have a chance in New York. You'll really have a chance. California, Oklahoma, like all the states. Let's say Oklahoma, you don't need it to get licensed, but you need it to get open. So then you have it. And that was the model of it, and we'll have other pieces we build out, but this is step one: get people in to the industry.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what does that cut their costs down by 75%? I mean,
at least.
Yeah.
Like you said, some consultants are 250,000, which I've seen too. I'm like, that's
ridiculous.
Real. That is, yeah. And I think with Leafsheets, if you bought every single sheet we have available for a single business line, you're in like 10 to 12,000.
Oh, wow.
So so
because mostly you're talking these micro businesses, right? Dispensaries. You're not talking about large grow operations or manufacturing. They're going to be heavily funded. They need the funding, so they can't just go on. They can't start a business that way for 10 grand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they, essentially, what was I going to say? I totally forgot.
We're talking about the cost of getting started with these little businesses versus the bigger ones, right?
Yeah. Anyway,
so I already lost my train of thought once. So
I know I'm like,
well, we were talking about the difference between, a larger operation wouldn't necessarily use this service. They're going to hire you to do the whole soup to nuts, right? It's as opposed to these smaller ones that are saying, oh, I can't do this. This is too much,
Yes. Oh, what I was going to say, one thing that if Nick is my co-founder and he will attest to this. I was so annoying about for 2 years, we built Leafsheets on our own because we thought we'll build it, prove it, and then raise capital for it. Okay. And for the entire 2 years, I was dead set on us needing payment plans. I said, a lot of these people, because it's so much capital up front, even I've had startups, even 15 grand can be a lot up front.
Sometimes they do legal fees that way. They have no choice.
Yeah. And so I said, okay, but we're a product. So how do we do payment plans? So we got Klarna. We got Afterpay.
What's Afterpay?
Afterpay.
Financing it sort of?
Basically. So you'll see it on Amazon and stuff. It'll say pay with Affirm or pay with Klarna.
Got it. So they're putting out the money and then they worry about it.
Yeah.
Because you're right. If you're selling a product now, once you give them the product, they have no incentive to keep paying.
Exactly.
Screwed. And you're not going to go and collect from them in Oklahoma.
Yeah. And if we have with hundreds of, say we had 100 people or we had thousands of buyers. Well, we
Yeah.
can't chase down thousands of people to
Right.
pay us.
Right.
So we'd have to have a whole 100-person finance department to figure that out.
Now, what prevents, now I'm sure it's limited licenses and stuff, but what really prevents somebody if I downloaded the Leafsheets and paid for them in my state, some of them are state specific, some are, and then my buddy was in South Jersey, he wanted to open up, can he just use my Leafsheets and you don't know about it? People can cheat you?
I mean, probably our biggest concern, one, we always hope like, okay, let's say you're in the same state that you don't want to give your competitors everything that you just paid
Right.
for.
That's true.
And then our biggest concern really would simply be anyone reselling them. So we invested in this attorney that just does very intense terms of use.
Yeah. He's an IP attorney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
No, that's
to have,
smart. That's smart.
you know, and we were big on that. I said, we have to have that. We can't even put anything up before we have that.
Right.
And that at the very least will give us some grounds to say, you know, you've got to stop doing
Cease and
this, got to
desist,
stop.
yeah,
Mhm,
type of stuff. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. No, IP is
Yeah.
important, right? It's all your intellectual property that you're creating and spending a lot of time doing it.
Exactly.
So you mentioned before about funding. So
Yeah.
Leafsheets is not just like a library of stuff. It's an actual business with partners and funding, and you're out there promoting it. And I guess it's all internet marketing, right? So
Yes, we built it to where it is right now to be the standard operating procedures that you can buy as products, and you can buy them individually. So you don't just have to buy all of them.
okay.
And then every single one of them has a DIY guide that guides you through it. Then we have our facts page, which essentially gives business advice and also answers very simple questions about each state and how each state works. So if you just want to know what the tax rate is or what the possession amount is, that kind of thing, we answer that for a bunch of states. And as just kind of an informational resource, our next steps though will be to have all of the sheets state specific. So we need funding for that. And then after that, we'll be building pieces that operators can use. And we need funding for that because we'll need more tech people to code it
Yeah.
all out.
Well, I mean, you know, the industry will grow as you grow. So more states will come online. How many states are left that are not online with cannabis?
Not many. I think it's like 12. 11 or 12 that are not on board at all.
Yeah.
And then there's like 18 that are recreational right now.
Got it. And there's others that are pending legislation and things like that.
Yeah.
Right? Arguing about
exactly. Yeah, arguing about it.
What I want your opinion on this because I'm always curious as to what would happen. So we know there was a bill recently that was brought to the House and they signed it just because they sign everything just to spite the Republicans. And it never even, I don't think it even got out of reconciliation, right? So that happens all the time. But if at some point they declassify cannabis on the federal level, what does that do to the industry? Does it just go nuts and there's large play? I mean, I just can't imagine, right? Because right now it's hard to operate in multiple states. You can own multi-states, I guess, right? But you can't transport, you can't be a grower in Western Pennsylvania and transport your product to New Jersey. So what do you think that does to the industry?
This is such an interesting question because it feels like there's a few ways it could go.
Yeah.
It will definitely be impacted by how the states react. If the states then also open things up more, or if they stay like, nope.
Right. I mean, look, the wine business did that in New Jersey. You couldn't ship wine from other states. So they could do that, right?
Yeah, a lot of states could do that. They would
growers.
say, no way. Yeah.
Right. We don't know who these people are growing in the backwoods of,
sending things
true.
In. Like, who are you? So a lot of them could do that. Any states, I guess, that allow kind of interstate commerce, that'll really open things up. We have one client who specifically put their facility right near one of the largest interstates, like up north, so they can easily transport. And I think there's a few that have done that.
In anticipation of someday it opening up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the smaller growers will not be okay. They're not going to be okay. I believe that.
Well, they might get stopped. They might get rolled up though.
That would be great.
Yeah.
That would be so great if the smaller ones got rolled up.
Yeah.
And I do help people right now to just sell sell their facilities, because in some states all the big players are already there and the little guys
Right.
are already struggling because of it.
Yeah.
And then with retail, hold on one. She's like, I
Funny.
forgot.
Did read your lips when you're talking.
Yeah. So what was I telling you?
We were talking about multi-state and the little guys being pushed out. So you range for their sale and their purchase and stuff like that.
Yes, we've been doing a lot of that. I think that there can still be those craft producers.
Yeah, just like the alcohol industry changed, right?
Yeah, exactly. I bet a lot of them will partner with larger facilities and use their product to produce the brand.
Yeah.
It's kind of an easier way to go than operating an entire cultivation facility.
Yeah.
And then I think retailers, I believe that even if you're smaller, you can do well if you have a good location, just like local liquor stores. If you have a great location, people are showing up, even if you just have one.
They're going to buy this stuff.
Exactly. It's just a matter of being in a good spot, which a lot of people will choose random spots because they fit the requirements, but they're not places people would ever go to shop. So,
right.
Yeah. If you have one of those spots, maybe not, maybe
right.
Not.
But if you're in Grand Central Station or in Penn Station, right, being the marijuana grower.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So now do a lot of states limit the number of licenses? Because I think in New Jersey right now, you can only own, I think, there's certain, you can only own one, and you've got to hold it for 2 years, right, before you sell it, something like that. A lot of states have those kind of restrictions.
Yes. A lot of states that came after, I would say like 2017, started to say you can't sell for X amount of years.
Right. Because they didn't want people just buying licenses and then flipping them. Right.
Which is a lot of guys running around wanting to do exactly that.
I'm sure. Well, they do that in liquor business,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
So there's those limits on it. And then some states, so lawsuits largely are around the limited licenses and that merit-based system, which I think is why we're seeing New Jersey and New York not do that.
Oh, you mean they're suing the state and saying it's not constitutional for you to do that?
All the things where they'll say, what was this merit? Who graded this? What makes mine different from this one? It's so subjective. They'll get sued and tied up for years. Illinois has been tied up for years, 2 years, almost 3 years, I think.
And they haven't issued anything?
No, it's just sitting there.
Yeah, exactly. And what about multi-state operators? So I know there are in some multi-state operators, right? But they're not obviously like growing in Nevada and then shipping it to their facility in Michigan. You can't do that. So they're almost like little micro businesses that are owned by the same umbrella company.
Yes.
Does that vary by the state too, whether you can do that or not?
No. So if you can kind of just start up, and they have to do every state independently, which is, I mean, how financially heavy is that?
Right, gotta be a big. Well, but you also still have the residency requirement, right? So you may have to have an owner. You may be able to be a partner with somebody, but they may have to own a significant portion of the business.
Yes, and they'll do all kinds of things. And in Illinois, the last licensing, you had to have a social equity person, have at least 51% of the business, and large multi-state operators got some of those licenses. And there's absolutely no way they gave any social equity applicant 51% of the business.
Right.
So they'll figure out ways to, I guess, get around it and to write the contracts just to get into certain states with those kinds of rules.
Well, that's where these lawsuits come from, right? Because somebody who's representing the social equity person says, wait a second, there's no way.
Yeah, there's no way.
Yeah. So, politics and bribes.
Exactly. Well, there's a lawsuit. Did you see the lawsuit? That is basically saying that because I don't know if you know this, but a strange amount of the largest multi-state operators are from Chicago. A lot of them.
Yeah.
And so there's a lawsuit saying that they collude and that they've colluded and that it's corrupt, and they've done so, especially in Illinois. And I'm like, whoa, we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Chicago's got a history of
yeah.
corruption and graft.
Yes. yeah. So it's like the Wrigley family, Kobler family, and one other one. Yeah.
Oh, really? There's some big families that are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that stuff is interesting. I think that'll keep happening.
It's like DraftKings, there's a lot of like big sports team owners that are involved in those things because they're making tons of money.
Yeah.
The rich get richer, right? That's the way a lot of these legislations is at least designed, is to help the smaller business owner, to help the formerly incarcerated person, veterans, women-owned businesses, and things like that. Whether it actually gets enforced that way, we'll see. It's obviously a big part of the one in New Jersey.
It is. And everyone's trying to do that. Every state, well, not every state.
Because it's PC, right? Because it's politically correct. Doesn't mean that behind the scenes, they're not shaking each other's hand,
Exactly. Yeah. They're like, well, at least it looks good,
Right. Exactly.
And no state has pulled it off well, gotten it to a place where there's no lawsuit or where it actually empowers any disadvantaged group. A lot of times the programs will strangely make things more difficult for those people or kind of set them up for failure.
Right.
New York's making some good moves to help them out with the real, finding the real estate and having a fund for them and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I could see upstate New York. You're talking very rural, but in Manhattan, gets to be just for a place is going to cost you a lot of money.
So much.
So expensive. It's ridiculous. But look, that's the world of real estate and big business. And, look, you write the legislation, you do what you do, you try and fight the good fight. Big business is going to force their way in. There's profits to be made. And that's the reality of it. And it's hard. It's difficult. Small business owner. That's why I like what you're doing, because you're giving like these small business owners a fighting chance to get started. Look, if they get going, they got their cash flow, they want to bring you on board as a consultant, compliance people, whatever, they'll have the money to do it. But getting started is always the barrier to entry. Yeah,
exactly. So as soon as you get a license in a state, especially if it's a hot market, then there's so many investors that are ready to invest, but they'll stand off until you actually have a license.
Yeah, I actually spoke to a friend of mine who does work in the equity space. Cannabis raising money. He said none of his people will talk to you unless you have a license.
Yeah.
They'll talk to you about your concept and they'll be like, okay, great. Call me when you have your license. But some of these owners need pre-funding.
Yeah.
It's hard, but I've been working on some of them.
Yeah, it's hard too because everyone's pitch is similar. So
what can your pitch be? We're going to sell a lot of cannabis.
We're going to sell it. We're going to have a really cool store. We'll train our team, like all the same things. And it's difficult to tell who will do that and do it well and who won't when you all know the same things to say.
Right. I think that's why it's important if you're getting started, like let's say New Jersey, right? That you have a partner. Maybe you're the in-state person and you're the residential person. You meet that requirement, but you might not have a lot of experience in the business. You need to put a team together and make partners of people that have been successful in other jurisdictions, maybe even sold their companies, right? Because that's the only thing. It's not a guarantee, but at least you could say, well, this person has done it before.
Exactly.
That's all they're investing in. The rest of it is they're not concerned that people are going to use cannabis.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like left the station, right? The demand is clearly there on all levels. It's really it's almost like a given. Once you're licensed, you really have to fall on your face to not make some money if you're operating, right?
Oh, exactly. Yes. And you're right. The investors, a lot of times their primary question is, well, how are you going to make it work? Who knows what they're doing?
Right.
And that's why some companies will hire consultants like us to help them. And some will just find at least someone who's been a GM of the kind of business they're opening or something like that. Which so it's cool to have an owner because they know the back end, like business structural stuff. Having someone who's been a GM is really great because they know the
how to manage
nitty-gritty operational stuff that owners don't. They like to think they know a lot of times, but if you're not there every day, you really don't know.
Right. Yeah. And even if the demand's there, but you can end up with regulatory shutdowns, right? compliance issues. You're not following this, you're not following that. You get a complaint from the town, you get a complaint from neighbors. They come in and investigate you or visit
Yeah.
you, and then you got trouble, right?
Yes. Yep. They'll shut you down. So you got to have really good people in there.
And you're losing money by the minute.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then what do you do? I was thinking about that. There was I read one of the SOPs on like recall, like if there's a problem with, like, say, a batch of whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I was talking to somebody and said, well, what do you do with it? You can't just, like, keep it and just throw it out. You can't do that. You can't just throw it in a dumpster, right?
Yeah.
So what do? You burn it, and then you got other issues. So yeah.
Yes.
I'm sure there's companies that do that, right? There's companies that dispose properly.
Yes. There's the biggest two plans that most companies will fail on if they fail their licensing is inventory control and recall and withdraw. Their waste management.
Got it.
And the waste, usually they say you have to grind it up and make a 50-50 mix with an organic compound. So you'll do paper, you'll do coffee grinds or something, dirt, and mix that to make it unusable.
And then where does it go? And
then sometimes there's waste companies that will take it, and sometimes you just put it in the trash, because if someone took it, they would just have dirt and
can't do anything with it.
Can't do anything with it.
Okay. Well, but you don't think about these things. There's a lot of, there's a whole industry, obviously, of all kinds of professionals now that are going to benefit from these companies that need these kind of resources.
Mm-hmm.
Hauling and sanitation is obviously one of them.
It is one of them, because it's important.
Yeah.
And the tracking.
Think about it.
Yeah. One of the primary
They're using these systems, right? Where the grower has to label them, and then it goes in a barcode, and right. Could you explain that a little bit?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. So the tracking is one thing that a lot of operators mess up on. Yeah, I would argue even really large operators. It's just a matter if anyone comes in and inspects and sees it happening.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And because you have to track every time a product moves, every time, even if you're turning it to waste. And then even once it's actually, removed from the facility as waste.
So you say tracking, you mean even in your facility? Like it's here at a raw product. Now it's over here. You got to know at any time where it is.
You have to, at all times, you have to know where it is. And the tracking system needs to know where it is. And that usually reports to the state. So they want to see it literally from the time usually they have a height. So they'll say once it's 12 inches grown, and then everything it does, every move it makes from that point.
So what, the plant gets tagged?
Mm-hmm.
With like a barcode, and then it's got to be put in something with the barcode and
their pot.
Now it's like dried substance, right? It can't tag each little leaf, so that's got to be in a container, properly labeled, right?
Yeah. So when they're growing, either the pot or the plant itself will have a little tag on it, and then once it's harvested, you still have to track it there, and then once it's actually trimmed, then you usually have large bins, and those have the tracking number. And then every state has a different rule for what a batch or a lot is, and they will define those two words differently, but like you have to have it. So Nevada, it's every 5 pounds gets tested. So they'll keep them in bins that are 5 pounds.
Got it. Yeah. So what are they testing for? Like THC levels or other things?
Terpenes, cannabinoids, mold, heavy metals, yeast, bacteria, pesticides. Yeah. All of
That's the problem, right? This stuff gets out in general circulation. It's got mold in it, and people getting sick.
Exactly. You don't want that. And that's when something will be recalled if consumers say, there's an issue with this, or that I think it was Curaleaf in Ohio, and they accidentally released a CBD product that actually had THC in it.
So it was a CBD product, not a cannabis, and it had THC in it?
Yeah. And so they had to recall it. Yeah. I was like, oh, whoops. Which is why you want to train your team well. It's so important, because all that stuff is in their hands. you
Right. They
know?
got to know what to do when it happens. So did you see a lot of recalls? Are there a lot of situations in different states where
No,
things are contaminated? It rarely happens.
yeah, rarely.
Okay. Well,
It's
that
not
means that
common.
the mechanism in place works, right? That they track things and they catch it early. Because there has to be
Exactly.
contamination and problems with product. It just never makes it out to the street.
Right. Yeah. So when you have your lab testing, and then
Uh-huh.
you can know, okay, this flower didn't pass. I can't even sell it.
Right.
And some places will let you then use that. Some will let you remediate it and try and make it okay and get it retested. Some will let you process it and make it into extract.
Okay.
And some will make you throw it away, like just quarantine it and waste it,
And that
which
varies
is,
state to state.
it varies state to state. Having
Interesting.
to waste that's a lot of money, you know. It's a lot of time and money.
Yeah, look, I think that the growing side of the business is like the most risky, right? You really need to know what you're doing because, I've had conversations with people that are like, well, we're not going into growing. You have to know what you're doing. You're going to kill your crop. Forget about it. You're done.
Yeah, that's a smart take. I know people that they think, oh, only cultivation, I'm going to go into cultivation, and it's agriculture.
Yeah.
So
Like you and I,
I'm
we'll
like,
open a farm and we'll start farming and all our
yeah,
plants are going to be fine and we're going to have a big crop.
exactly. I
It's not
kill
that
all the
easy.
plants I have.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
then you have to really hire the right people who actually, this is one of the biggest problems that a lot of cultivation facilities have had is that they'll hire people that say they know what they're doing and maybe have experience. And with these plants, you just switch states. There were consultants from California that came to Nevada, set up giant facility, didn't know how to correct for the climate, and
Yeah.
just
Right. You can't just
lost.
grow it the
Yeah,
same everywhere you go. Right.
exactly. So
And just
you
lost all
really
their
need
crop.
smart people. It's not
Yeah.
just a bunch of weed growers. These guys, it's so funny because you'll meet them and sometimes they seem totally just super lax, so casual. But when they're doing what they love, they are like mad scientists.
Yeah. No, they
Yeah,
understand the science of growing it.
exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's important.
Yeah. I would think that's the hardest part, right? Just because you're opening a facility doesn't mean you know what you're doing. You got to hire somebody and yeah.
Yeah, you got to know what happens. Like if you get little bugs, what you do, little
Right.
plant issues, all
I would
that.
think that the bet to me, and I could be you completely disagree with me. The manufacturing side of it, I think would be, you're not dealing with the general public directly, right? You're dealing just with
Mhm.
so I mean, I guess things could still get out there and you got to recall them. You don't have the growing side problem.
Yeah.
Your security is different because you're not having the general public coming in. The money situation, you're not having to, have people come in with debit cards and swiping things and things like that. I would
Yeah.
think that would be a little bit safer, but it's not for the small business owner, right? Because you can't open a tiny manufacturing facility because you need to make enough product to be able to sell to people and to provide that meet the demand.
Yes, you need scalability,
Yeah.
and consistency for the consumer that they can always go to the store and always find your product.
Right.
And I agree with you because, and anyone who gets cultivation, I always say you've got to get a production facility, production infusion, manufacturing, whatever it's called.
Right.
Um, because your inventory lasts. So when you're dealing with flour, it's will degrade. It'll
Right. You got to
degrade.
get it out there.
Yes. And with extractions, they will last way longer. So if you have an issue with a sell-through rate, it's more forgiving than if you've got flour sell-through problem. And also the extraction and the production facilities allow you to build true brands, which I think is great,
Yeah. I was
So
going to ask you that. So you said about you want to build a brand so they know that they're buying your joints or
product.
your extracts
Yeah,
or whatever it is, right?
exactly. So they
Yeah.
want to know that. And then when you can make, mints and you can make drinks and you can make whatever else you come up with, and
Gummies, right? Chocolate.
exactly,
Yeah.
and build a really cool brand, then really all you need to be great at is marketing. So you make
Right.
a
Well,
good
now you're building
product.
value, right? Because you're creating a
Hmm.
brand that has value. What do you think? What have you seen are the most popular products? Are they extracts? Are they Are they edible? What the heck was that? Was it a pipe, like a bagpiper in your kitchen? Um, just feedback, maybe? Just
I think
feedback?
it was either a phone or a doorbell.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So I don't care. I like it live. It doesn't matter. So is it more, so what's been more popular? Is it like edibles, joints, things like that?
Yes. I saw data, and you can see it in the stores, but I saw data from Headset,
Uh-huh.
and it showed that flour is still majorly the leader. So just
That's what
flour,
people
pre
smoke.
rolls, and edibles are gaining. They're gaining market share, and then drinks are like, and like capsules. There's
Oh yeah,
teeny
capsules
tiny.
you can, like
Yeah.
drinks, so like what? Like cannabis tea or what?
Yeah, or can. You
A
know the drink
can of,
can?
what does it taste like?
It's delish. It's got
Oh, okay.
they have all these different flavors. I would say they're one of the best companies across the nation at marketing. They have a really good brand personality. They have really good brand representation. They've worked with a ton of celebrities and stuff, and people love their product. I think I'm definitely in their target market, and everyone I know that are my friends, they love it. It's
So
like they
they
love
have
it
to
so much
open facilities, manufacturing facilities in specific states, right? So if they
in
want to sell,
specific
they want to
states.
sell in Nevada, they got to open a plant there. If they want to sell in New Jersey, they got to do the same thing.
They either have to do that or partner with someone with a license and manufacture out of their facility.
Right. They can't do it and then ship it there. That's the problem. You
Right.
can't cross state lines, then you're violating the federal law.
Exactly. But they can get away with not actually having to own the facility if they can just partner.
I see. Right. They can hire somebody to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. All right. Well, I've taken up a lot of your time. I think you have to go finish the dishes in your kitchen.
I know. And answer the door.
I appreciate it because clearly you know the business and you know the industry and what's going on. And if people want to find you, I'll put the link to Leafsheets in the show notes, especially for the small business owners who are looking to get started and don't really know like where to go and what to do.
Yeah. And any of the, well-funded ones, you come on over to Can Strategy.
Yeah. Well, what's the best way for them to get interact with you? Is it LinkedIn? Is it Instagram? Is it your website?
With me personally, LinkedIn. Yeah.
Okay.
I love LinkedIn.
All right, good. So anybody listening out there, they want to talk to Juliana and see what she's doing and find out more about the business as it grows in your state, go to all her websites or LinkedIn. And I thank you for spending an hour with me.
Thank you. This was great. You had great questions.
I appreciate it.